Practices, principles, and benefits of sustainable agriculture. After reading through the textbook, I began to question intensive agricultural practices. It seemed like these practices were doing more harm than good in the industry. This includes climate change and global warming threats, water contamination and pollution, and an interference with the prosperity of organisms within the ecosystem. I wanted to find out if there was an alternate way to agriculture that could reverse the negative effects that intensive agriculture formed. This topic is relevant because each day we contribute to these industries through food consumption. Ultimately, if the industry is to change, it must come about via human effort. It is our responsibility to question where our food comes from and who benefits or suffers because of it. As stated before, this topic is extremely comparative. I compared intensive farming practices to sustainable ones. As I did this, I uncovered a lot about each topic. Sustainable farming, according to Green Tumble, a company that supports sustainable agriculture, supports an anti-chemical approach, conserves water and energy, values biodiversity and the ecosystem, and promotes working within the natural limits of the earth. In contrast, intensive farms focused on uniformity, cash crops, monocultures, and profit. It is important to compare in order to see the true problems and benefits associated with each. There were many ideas, findings, and concerns that stood out to me while I did my research. Firstly, I uncovered that there is a severe environmental impact from intensive farming practices. Thomas Perrone, a writer at LifeGate 20, discusses how intensive farming is associated with climate change. He states, intensive agriculture is one of the sectors that generates the highest amount of emissions of carbon dioxide. He later drops the statistic that agriculture was responsible for 21% of all carbon dioxide emissions between 2000 and 2010. In addition to this, Sonia Madden discusses the negative impact chemicals used in agriculture has on aquatic life. She states, high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizers, manure, and animal waste in surface waters gives rise to eutrophication, which depletes dissolved oxygen, killing fish and other aquatic life. Intensive agriculture practices negatively impact many parts of the environment. Secondly, I learned about the importance of the ecosystem in agriculture. Allowing nature to flourish on its own creates a platform for biodiversity and prosperity. After watching the film The Biggest Little Farm, I saw how well the ecosystem can evolve when not tampered with by outside sources. The life and death of each organism benefited another. For instance, the death of a plant gave life to microorganisms, and the microorganisms gave life to new plants. Promoting an ecosystem in agriculture is promoting prosperity. Thirdly, I learned about the new and uprising practice of agroecology. Jeffrey Magiro, who is a specialist in environmentalism, states that agroecology is the science of running our farms as an ecosystem. This science believes that by not working against nature, the ecosystem will be protected and profitability won't be reduced. There were many new ideas, concerns, and findings that I learned when researching this topic. There are many connections between our papers, but what stood out the most to me was the need for change, the values of ethics in food production systems, and the embracing of Jesuit values. My speech discusses the need for change from intensive agricultural practices to sustainable ones. Sterling's paper mentions the necessity to move away from excessive amounts of antibiotics and growth hormones in food-producing animals, and Jansen's paper talks about the need for synthetic pesticides to be reduced in crop production. Each of these issues have negative implications on people, animals, or nature. In addition to change, these topics all challenge ethics in the food production industry. They all make you question if current practices are really what should be promoted in the future. Evaluating the ethics of these topics has led all of us to integrate Jesuit values into our academic careers. First, we have sought to form and educate agents of change. All of us chose topics in which we believe to be problematic to society. Through our essays and presentations, we are educating agents of change. Second, we are being men and women for and with others. All of our topics impact the livelihood and health of other humans. Sterling emphasizes the impact antibiotics and growth hormones have on children. Jansen exemplifies how synthetic pesticides can impact people's health. And I bring up how intensive agriculture impacts climate change, which can and will impact the health of future generations. All of our topics link together by embracing the necessity of change, ethics, and Jesuit values, all while having a holistic approach.
The first recorded use of synthetic pesticides is about 4,500 years ago. It was used by the Sumerians, who would use sulfur compounds to control insects and mites. And about 3,200 years ago, they were used by the Chinese, who were using mercury and arsenical compounds for controlling body lice. The use of synthetic pesticides began to increase in the US around the 1930s, and farmers began to depend on them. They started depending on them after World War II. The main goal of pesticides is to protect crops from being damaged or killed by harmful organisms such as bacteria or insects. Pesticides have helped farmers increase their yield by protecting their crops. However, pesticides have shown to have their downfalls. Synthetic pesticides are chemical substances that are used to kill harmful organisms. However, it can be harmful to the environment and to the people's health. When people are not careful with synthetic pesticides, the chemicals from the pesticide can harm an entire environment. It can kill organisms that are essential for the plants and the environment, and pesticides can affect the food people eat. Chemicals have a chance of spreading throughout the environment if people are not careful using them. According to Dr. Akhter, the article Impact of Pesticides Use in Agriculture, Their Benefits and Hazards. Pesticides can reach surface water through runoff from treated plants and soils. The chemicals from the synthetic pesticide can travel through water and into rivers and contaminate the environment. Things like rivers and streams are contaminated, which leads to poisoning and killing of fish. Animals can use the river as a source of water, and they can be affected by the chemicals that are present in the water. The chemicals can travel through the wind and spread, scattering around the environment. Pesticides can even remain in the environment after it is broken down and still cause damage to the environment. In the article Pesticide Half-Life, it stated that when pesticides break down, they do not disappear. Instead, they can form new chemicals that may or may not be as toxic as the chemicals used in the synthetic pesticides. In addition, some chemicals may not even be broken down initially, and there are multiple ways they can be broken down, such as radiation from the sun, microbes, and water. Although it seems like pesticides are there to help the environment, the chemicals used in it can harm more than just the targeted organisms in the environment. The main goal of pesticides is to protect crops from being damaged by harmful organisms. However, in 2017, there was a study done by researchers that found that chemicals can poison bees, causing symptoms such as paralysis, vomiting, or death when they eat contaminated nectar or pollen, or even crawl over sprayed surfaces. Yet, neonicotinoids still account for more than 20% of the world's insecticide market. Bees are one of the many insects and small animals that play an important role in the environment known as pollinators. Pollinators carry the pollen to different flowers which fertilize the plant and allows the plant to reproduce. Wildflowers such as wildflowers depend on pollinators in order to reproduce. Other disadvantages of widespread pesticides are super significant because they can include domestic animal contamination and deaths, loss of natural antagonists to pests, pesticide resistance. Some gardeners have even chosen to stop using these synthetic pesticides and resorted to using other methods of controlling harmful organisms. Some of them introduce these things called beneficials into their garden in order to help control these insect populations. Since pesticides can remain on plants after they are sprayed, it is possible for people to ingest these organic food products with some residue of these pesticides on the organic products, such as fruits and vegetables. There are a number of immediate and long-term effects of pesticides can have on a person. According to the article, Pesticide and Human Health, some immediate health effects include irritation of the nose, throat, and skin, which can cause burning, stinging, or even itching, as well as rashes and blisters. Nausea, dizziness, and diarrhea are also really common. However, there can be some long-term effects too, such as having cancer and tumors, damage of the brain and nervous system, birth defects, infertility, and damage to certain organs like the liver, kidney, and lungs. There are 3 general ways for a person to be exposed by pesticides, and it's by direct contact, ingestion, and inhalation. It is important for people to wear protective gear when using pesticides because of these ways that chemicals can enter into our body and damage them. Unless they are properly clean, people can ingest the pesticides along with the food they are eating. Synthetic pesticides have also shown to affect culture and the economy of people and where they live. In the article Synthetic Pesticides in Africa, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, it states that pesticides have made it possible to increase production in crops and livestock enterprises in Africa. Africa's population was estimated to be at 1.3 billion people, and it would only keep increasing. Pesticides help increase yields, improve nutrition, provide additional household income, and facilitate local and international trade. However, people in Africa began to depend too much on these synthetic pesticides, and they would use them without knowing the proper way to use them or understand the consequences that come from using these chemicals. Pesticide residue above the acceptable daily intake were detected in cooked food samples in some African communities and is thus a major source of concern. Synthetic pesticides have shown to be more harmful to the environment and to the health of humans than being beneficial. If people use pesticides without being cautious, the chemicals from the pesticide can harm an entire environment, harm organisms that are essential for plants and the environment, and pesticides can infect the food that people eat. Some people began using different methods in order to help increase their crop yields without using these chemicals. Some farmers began using biopesticides, which are less toxic than synthetic pesticides because they are made more natural material. And some have been adding these things called beneficials. They are also known as biological control agents into their farm that target specific organisms that harm their crops. The chemicals that linger on the crops can harm a person's health if the product is not cleaned properly. Farmers should be trained on how to use these synthetic pesticides and their consequences if they refuse to listen. Synthetic pesticides are very helpful in increasing crop yields, but they need to be used cautiously and properly. Unfortunately, companies all around the world are always demanding their products and ingredients to make their products in order to sell and make money. The more they sell, the more money they make, which leads to people like farmers finding ways of increasing their production. Synthetic pesticides are very helpful in increasing production of crops, but without the proper training, it can have various deadly effects on the environment and with people. In the short term, pesticides can greatly assist with pest control. However, in the long term, pesticides can appear to harm the health of humans and the environment. When using synthetic pesticides, be very careful with using it, as one mistake can have major consequences. These consequences should not be overlooked because of the benefits synthetic pesticides provide to people, the production of crops, and the economy. Throughout all of our topics, I've learned that all of our topics relate to the health of people and animals in some way. Gracie's topic focuses on how people aren't using safe agricultural methods. Chemicals were spilling into fresh water and contaminating them, the increased amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere that affects weather change. Both Sterling and I have topics that relate to how people aren't practicing sustainable agricultural ways. Giving growth hormones and antibiotics to food-producing animals can affect the health of people when we eat the meat that has already been contaminated by those drugs. Synthetic pesticides can harm people and the environment. In order to practice sustainable agriculture, people can start by paying attention to the damages they are causing when they are using chemicals. They need to start using alternative methods that include natural ingredients rather than chemicals to reduce the risk of harming the environment and people.
My topic will discuss the impacts that growth hormones and antibiotics in food-producing animals have on the consumer, and also, more specifically, how it impacts the health of children and their development. I wanted to find out how exactly growth hormones came into the food industry and why it came into the food industry. I also wanted to find out how it impacted the consumers. And more importantly, I wanted to prove that growth hormones and antibiotics have a physical and psychological impact on the health and development of the children who consume them. By viewing my topic through a holistic lens, I was able to also find out that this is an issue that is not posed just on America. However, it impacts American consumers more so than other countries because of our general tendency of eating products from food-producing animals over any other country. Other countries consume meat, however, generally on a much lower scale. As you can see from this photo, The United States, Argentina, and Australia are the three most meat-eating countries. So the issues I speak upon are mainly focused on countries like these and other darker red countries. However, it is not a global problem. According to the Center for Veterinary Medicine, in the early 1950s, scientists discovered that growth hormones could be extracted from cattle and then re-injected to promote better size and better production. In 1935, antibiotics were first used to mitigate infections within cattle and other food-producing animals. America is one of the most meat-eating countries in the globe, and because of this, there is a high demand for food-producing animals. This demand followed with the use of growth hormones and antibiotics to help improve the health, size, and production of the cattle, which in turn means more profit. Over time, growth hormones and antibiotics evolved and became a common practice. According to What the Health, there are at least 450 drugs that are administered to animals, and the pharmaceutical industry sells 80% of all antibiotics made in the United States to animal agriculture. Traditionally, humans take antibiotics to fight illnesses and viruses that are difficult to fight alone. However, if humans take too many antibiotics over a short period of time, their immune system weakens and they become less likely to fight or resist bacteria. Antibiotics are administered to food-producing animals in order to fight viruses and other diseases that commonly affect livestock. Antibiotics are essential for farmers to maintain the health of their animals. Antibiotics are needed to treat infections such as pink eye and other wounds. Because of this, it is impossible to ban all antibiotics from being administered to cattle. However, the overuse of these antibiotics administered to food-producing animals does impact the consumer drastically. According to What the Health, approximately 23,000 people die each year from antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Although some growth hormones are naturally occurring in food-producing animals, some growth hormones are implanted in food-producing animals. Growth hormones allow for production and size of the cattle to increase. According to ncbi.org, in excess, these growth hormones can negatively impact the health of the food-producing animals. According to ncbi.org, they also said, toxicological impact implies any biological adverse effects caused by direct intake of veterinary drugs such as weight change, immune suppression, and various disorders of normal body function. The hormonal impact that added growth hormones have on the consumer are real. Although there are some growth hormones that do not impact human development or hormonal changes, it is the added growth hormones that pose a threat to the health of the consumer. The hormones that affect children the most and their development are the ones that their bodies can process, and these hormones often affect children when they are consumed in excess. According to the American Public Health Association, fetuses, infants, and children are thought to be more vulnerable to the hormone-disrupting effects of exogenous hormones and hormone-like chemicals. A recent consensus conference reviewed the robust and growing body of science that exposure to environmental chemicals, especially in utero, can disrupt normal hormone function and alter child development, as well as alter fetal programming, adding to the risks for hormone-related cancers and other chronic diseases later in life. The effects on children are real. In a study done in 2014 by the Endocrine Society, they found that children who consume growth hormones regularly through food often have a higher chance to experience mental health problems such as depression and anxiety. After talking to my group about our topics, we have found that a main similarity between the three lies in the principle of ethics. My topic talks about the excess use of antibiotics and growth hormones in food-producing animals and the health impact that has on the consumer. Jansen's topic speaks mostly upon the use of pesticides and the impact that these pesticides have on human health. Lastly, Gracie's topic speaks upon human health impact that agricultural practices and the chemicals they use have on the environment and on the human health. All three of these topics have a commonality of whether or not the practice is ethical. In all cases, the evidence seems to point to the fact that human and environmental health are in jeopardy within all practices of our topics. Overall, our topics clearly connect through an environmental lens as well as a cultural one. Through talking to them, I was also able to gain an insight on a holistic aspect of each of our topics and the relevance that each one has as it pertains to other societies and cultures around the globe. Thank you.